begin first with a land acknowledgement. So as we begin our meetings, we respectfully acknowledge that our meeting is taking place on occupied Coast Salish land. We pay respect to Coast Salish elders, past and present, and extend that respect to their descendants and to all Indigenous people. To acknowledge this land is to recognize the history of physical and cultural genocide and settler colonialism, which continues to displace Indigenous people today. It is to also recognize these lands, waters, and their significance for the resilient and wise peoples who continue to thrive in this region despite the consequences of displacement and broken treaties. Those who hold settler privilege in this city must work towards supporting the Coast Salish people and all Indigenous people using the various forms of wealth and privilege they reap due to it. My name is Nick Whipple. I use he, him pronouns. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Seattle Planning Commission, along with CEO Alvarez. We'll start with some announcements to members of the public and visitors. Welcome. We are happy to make all commission meetings open to the public. Please note that the Planning Commission does not hold public hearings since the commission is an advisory body. We provide recommendations to elected officials that in turn make the actual decisions. We encourage individuals and organizations to provide their comments appropriately to elected officials. And then today's meeting is a hybrid meeting. It looks like we have some individuals participating in person, others participating remotely. Those that are in person are in the boards and commissions room at Seattle City Hall. So for our first kind of topic, or I guess we'll move into the color brave space norms first. So at this time, I'd like to invite a commissioner, if you could please choose and just briefly speak to one of the color brave space norms that you feel is particularly relevant to today's agenda topic. And as a reminder, the agenda today is a working session on the upcoming independent work of the Planning Commission. So is there anyone that wants to volunteer to select a color brave space norm to speak about? I can't see those in person, so you might have to shout if you're in person at volunteering. Would anyone like me to call on
I'll go.
folks? Okay, thank you. I don't know who volunteered, but
It's
thanks.
TJ Stutman. I'll
Great,
speak
TJ.
to look for learning and commit to learning in public. I think it's important in these contexts that we acknowledge, though many of us have specialties in one area or another, we all have areas where we can expand our knowledge, learn from others, and do so in a public forum without feeling self-conscious about gaps in our knowledge. So I think that learning in public is an important principle that we can uphold.
Great, appreciate that, TJ. If there are no amendments or modifications, I suggest that we all agree to these norms. All right, so we'll do a round of introductions next. So if you could, as you're introducing yourself, start with, of course, your name, your pronouns, the neighborhood that you live with or live in, and then your day job. I'll go first. So my name is Nick Whipple. I use he, him pronouns. For my day job, I am a planner on the east side, and I live in West Seattle in the North Delridge neighborhood. I'll turn it over to my co-chair, CEO.
Hi, good morning. My name is Leo Alvarez. I have she, they pronouns. I live in White Center, Highland Park, and for my day job, I'm an architect and urban planner at an architecture firm in downtown Seattle. I'll pass to Andy.
Hi, Andy Dannenberg, he, him, Northeast Seattle, and I teach in urban planning and public health at the University of Washington. Dylan Glasecki.
Yes, Dylan Glasecki, I use he, him pronouns. I'm an architect and urban designer with Perkins Eastman here in Seattle, and I live in the central area. Let's see, about Patrick.
My name is Patrick Taylor. I use he, him pronouns. I live in beautiful North Beacon Hill, and in my day job, I work on multifamily housing projects at an architecture firm. And I'll pass it over to Amir.
Good morning, everyone. This is Amir Isai. I use he, him pronouns, and I live in the Greenwood neighborhood. My day job, I work on sustainability for network and data centers at Meta. And I'll pass it on to Haley.
Hey everyone, I'm Haley Karcher. I use she, her pronouns. I live in Columbia City and I work for Seattle Public Schools in their planning department. I will pass it on to Rebecca.
Hi all, Rebecca Braden, she, her pronouns. I live in Wedgwood. I keep forgetting, so I just moved. And my day job is transit-oriented development for Sound Transit. I'll stay in the room and pass it to Michaela.
Good morning, Michaela Daffrin. I use she, her pronouns. I live in Capitol Hill and I work in affordable housing policy and planning. And I will pass it to TJ.
Morning, I'm TJ Stutman. My pronouns are he, him. I live in the Holler Lake neighborhood, and my day job is in the King County Executive's Budget Office.
I think we can move on to staff. Thank you, Olivia.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Olivia Baker, she, her pronouns, and I'm staff to the Planning Commission.
Good morning, I'm John Hoy. I use he, him pronouns, and I am also staff to the Planning Commission.
I'll wrap us up. Good morning, everyone. My name is Vanessa Murdoch. I use she, her pronouns. I too am staff, or three, am staff to the Planning Commission. Thank you all for joining this morning. And I'll turn it back to Nick.
All right, so we have one agenda item today, and that is to hold a working session on upcoming independent work of the Planning Commission. Before we transition into that agenda item, though, I believe we do have a quorum, so we can take a vote on approving the August 13th meeting minutes. So we'll do that as kind of first business. So can I get a motion for approving the August 13th meeting minutes?
Motion to approve.
So moved. Second.
Okay, so we've got a motion in the room. I think that was TJ, and a second from Andy.
That was not me, Nick.
Oh, sorry.
Patrick
Was that Patrick?
and
Okay.
Andy.
Wow, this is really hard to track. Thank you, Patrick and Andy. Okay, so we've got a motion and a second. And then any changes or amendments to the meeting minutes? Hearing none, well, let's call for a vote. So all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the meeting minutes pass. We'll start first with the chair's report. So just wanted to highlight upcoming meetings. So our next Housing and Neighborhoods Committee meeting is scheduled for Thursday, September 3rd in the morning, 7:30 to 9 on Teams. And then our next full commission meeting is scheduled for Thursday, September 10th from 3 to 5 p.m. I'll turn it over to Vanessa for some announcements.
Great. Thanks, Nick. As Nick noted, this is a hybrid meeting. So we have 3 planning commissioners here in the room. Remember the public, thank you for coming. And the rest of the commissioners are participating online. During the meeting, there will be opportunities for questions and comments. We do use the chat function of MS Teams for commissioners to be recognized to speak by the chair. I will assist Nick in keeping the queue organized so we know who is going to speak next. If I could ask those commissioners in the room to also use the chat, that would be really helpful. We do welcome public comment in a variety of ways, either by emailing me coming to the meeting in person or calling in or joining the meeting via Teams. I don't see any members of the public, Nick, so I think we can skip that portion of the meeting and move on to our working session.
Great. All right, so staff is going to walk us through a proposed approach to our independent work, focusing on support for the centers and corridors legislation and the to be developed taller, denser, faster legislation, both of which will help implement the One Seattle plan. So we do have about an hour and 15 or so minutes for this agenda item, so I'll turn it over to staff.
Thanks, Nick. So what I'm going to do, commissioners, is walk through a PowerPoint that is mostly modeled after the advanced materials that I sent to you on Monday. I'm going to flip the script a little bit and first go over background and context, and then move into the proposed approach. And then we'll use the balance of the time to actually brainstorm on our responses to some of the concerns that have been raised about the both of these pieces of legislation. One piece of legislation being centers and corridors, and then the other being the taller, denser, faster that hasn't actually been drafted yet. Next slide, please. So I know most of you know this, but just so we're all on the same page, the One Seattle plan was adopted by City Council in December of last year. That is our comprehensive plan that we took 4 or 5 years to update, a major update. That plan includes a growth strategy that outlines place types for where and how the city will grow. And it also includes a future land use map showing the planned locations for these place types. Permanent state zoning compliance legislation was also adopted in December of 2025. That brings us into compliance with the state middle housing bill, also known as HB 1110. It included updated neighborhood residential zones to include greater variety of housing types, including 4 units or up to 6 units near transit stops at an average of 3 stories. Centers and corridors legislation was transmitted to City Council in January of this year, but has not yet been considered due to a SEPA appeal. It is anticipated City Council will consider the legislation in early next year, pending resolution of that appeal. This legislation is required to actually implement zoning for neighborhood center and corridor place types. Next slide, please. So just to a very high level recap of what the centers and corridors legislation includes. In the materials I sent you on Monday, there is a hyperlink to the actual ordinance if you want to read through it. The easiest to look at it in 2 buckets, the zoning changes and then changes in development standards. So there are rezones to implement 30 neighborhood centers. It expands the boundaries of 5 urban centers, adds a new urban center at Pinehurst Holler Lake, allows greater density on properties adjacent to frequent transit routes outside of centers, and applies mandatory housing affordability requirements to all rezoned properties. The changes in development standards that the centers and corridors legislation proposes are updates to height limits in low-rise zones to provide incentives for stacked flats, allowing more livable floor-to-floor heights, and make LR3, that's low-rise 3 heights, consistent. It updates the floor area ratio for stacked flats in low-rise 1 and 2 zones with 6+ units to match bonuses in neighborhood residential zones. It also increases the floor area ratio in low-rise 3 zones, both inside and outside of centers, to increase the feasibility of apartments and condos in these zones over the standard townhomes. And it creates a new mid-rise zone to allow for additional height variation, low-rise 3, 5 stories, mid-rise 1, 6 stories, mid-rise 2, 7 to 8 stories. Next slide, please. So the Planning Commission quickly turned around a comment letter on the centers and corridors legislation. This is when we thought it would be entertained by council this summer. We encouraged council to adopt the legislation without changes, noting that reducing the capacity of proposed rezones would diminish the intent of the One Seattle plan. We also reminded City Council that the legislation is based on 4 years of planning and community engagement, and we encouraged them to consider input in a balanced way that does not prioritize last-minute input. We also reminded Council that the legislation aims to increase housing supply and diversity of options for more households throughout the city, which is an important step towards addressing housing affordability and racial inequity due to exclusion and historic redlining and the repercussions thereof. We noted that the original legislation added density in low displacement risk areas, but that many of the reductions from October of last year to January of this year were in these low risk areas. We encouraged promoting maximum zoning in centers by adding more MR1 zoning to neighborhood centers, which would provide more opportunities for multifamily apartment buildings and for ground floor commercial options. We recommended also that we zone all remaining residential, or not we, the city zone all remaining residential parcels that are not neighborhood commercial or mid-rise to LR3, as LR1 and 2, again, that's low-rise 1 and low-rise 2, do not produce sufficiently dense development to promote affordability. And finally, we encouraged City Council to consider the balance of maximizing transit investments through added density near frequent transit with the negative impacts of living along busy arterials. And that foreshadows the Planning Commission's support for greater residential density off corridors, that 1 and 2 block, maybe even 3 blocks off the frequent transit corridors that will be hopefully entertained in the taller, denser, faster legislation. Next slide, please. So taller, denser, faster is AKA phase 3 of implementing the One Seattle plan. And in April of this year, the mayor announced her intention to pursue a next phase of zoning that emphasized making it go faster, to create more affordable and abundant housing to address housing affordability challenges by significantly expanding the housing supply. There is also a guiding principle of not waiting and to deliver these zoning changes as soon as possible, including implementing House Bill 1491. That's again, Washington State House Bill 1491, otherwise known as the TOD bill, and encouraged the mayor directed staff to come up with legislation that would implement that bill sooner than required. Also, the mayor directed staff to increase housing options near transit and community amenities, such as parks, schools, libraries, services, shops, and to add healthy and safe housing options on quiet streets off roads with heavy traffic. The push for having this phase 3 be developed and considered more quickly than was originally planned was stalled out a little bit by the SEPA appeals that we heard about from Michael Hebner at our August 13th meeting. Next slide, please. So staff's proposed approach to you all is to review our comment letter on the Centers and Corridors legislation and identify areas to build upon and reinforce, to meet with council members in the next couple of months, starting with Land Use and Sustainability Committee members, and ask them, in addition to introducing ourselves, we're the Planning Commission, we're an independent body, we advise council and the mayor on issues related to housing, transportation, livability, sustainability, and land use. We also want to use those opportunities when we're meeting with individual council members to ask them what would be helpful for them to have as a tool or a resource as they consider the Centers and Corridors legislation early next year. To date, we have 2 meetings scheduled with city council members and their staff. City council is on break this week and next week. So we're hoping to get the rest of those council meetings scheduled when they come back from their well-deserved break. The third item, or the third stage of the proposed approach, is to review points made to slow down or significantly modify both the centers and corridors legislation and the anticipated taller, denser, faster legislation, and develop responses for initially our internal reference. And once we have those responses, we can then figure out how we want to present that based on feedback from the city council members that we meet with this fall. So we've talked about moving away from our standard letter and moving into something that might be more approachable, graphically engaging, have resources, but not be a very dense document. As for city council members, what will be most helpful for them will be to have sort of like a 4-pager little reference points that they can refer to. And I just saw Patrick had a question in the chat, but now I've lost. Okay. Patrick, I'm afraid somehow I dropped.
It was just, will the meetings with council members include commission members, or is it just you and the other staff members?
Currently, the 2 that are scheduled are myself and the co-chairs. And then as we move through the other the meetings with other council members, we may be tapping other commissioners, especially as we meet with the district-based. Right now, our 2 meetings are with the citywide council members, staff from Leon Foster's office, and then meeting with Councilmember Rink later on in September. But stay tuned, because I may be reaching out to individual council members, city planning commissioners, as we start meeting with the district-based commissioners. If you can bear with me one moment, because I've lost my Teams connection. Can you go to the next slide, please, Olivia? Excellent. So I was going to propose, and then I'm going to open it up for reactions as well as questions on what I've already covered. I was going to propose we use the remaining time this morning, the next hour and 5 minutes, to brainstorm responses to concerns that have been raised by individuals and groups who have concerns regarding the centers and corridors legislation, as well as the taller, denser, faster. The concerns that have been raised, that this is not a complete list, but it's the beginning of a list. There's been voice of concern over loss of trees, urban canopy, urban tree canopy, and neighborhood green space. There's been concern voiced about an increased pressure on already overburdened parks. Reduced opportunities to create new public open spaces, weaker climate resilience and environmental protections, inadequate investments in stormwater, sewer, and energy infrastructure. There's been a concern noted that the process has excluded and will continue to exclude residents from decisions that will shape Seattle for generations. That particular point, I think, is in reference to the SEPA reform that Councilmember Lynn proposed and was passed by the City Council. Denying neighborhoods most impacted by historic inequities of voice, and accelerating displacement of longtime residents. So I'm going to stop talking for a moment, open it up to questions from the earlier slides, and then hopefully responses to the approach. And then if you're all in agreement, we can start brainstorming responses to the concerns noted on the slide. So if you want to jump in, please put your name in the chat.
Looks like we've got Andy in the chat for a quick, perhaps clarifying question. So maybe Andy, why don't you ask your question?
Yeah, just the term low displacement risk doesn't jump out to me as exactly what that means. Is there a definition to go with that?
I'm not very good at multitasking, but there is the Office of Planning and Community Development developed a map of areas of high displacement risk, low displacement risk, high access to opportunity, and low access to opportunity. And when I stop talking, I can look it up and put it in the chat. But basically, low risk of displacement. Is that what you were asking, Andy? Low risk of displacement?
Yeah, it's sort of, it doesn't jump out. I'm trying to think through what the words mean as kind of low displacement risk. Is that because it's already well off, so it's not going to be displaced, and a high displacement means they're not well off? Is that kind of what it's implying? But the words don't jump out at me as exactly what is intended by that term. So it's not so much where they are, but how the words are being used.
Right. My understanding is that the determination of low displacement risk, and I invite any commissioners and other staff to jump in and help me out here, but is based on a number of different factors. So it looks at turnover in sale properties, rental properties. That's really hard. Migration is very hard to track, as we've learned from Diana Canzaneri, the city demographer. It's also looks at areas that have been upzoned and are at risk because of economic factors, of having economic pressures to sell lower density properties that have been recently or not so recently rezoned. It also looks at socioeconomic factors and displacement of cultural anchors. So being displaced, either churches or ethnic cultural institutions that have been displaced because they can't afford it anymore, and then that has caused communities to lose to use an anchor, lose an anchor.
So the question is it implying low displacement means they're already pretty well off, and a high risk means they're probably not well off? Is that the direction it's going? That's what I'm trying to. I understand there's lots of pieces that go into that.
I think
Yeah,
Michaela might have a response too. I think it's a little more nuanced than just is a neighborhood
okay, yeah,
affluent or is it not. I think there is the methodology that Seattle has for their displacement risks. So it might be helpful. I don't know, Michaela, were you in the chat to help respond on this one or no?
I want to continue the conversation around displacement, but I want to just see if Andy still needs help understanding. We continue to, given that it's an index, it's a whole variety of issues, a lot of them being socioeconomic. And so, yes, in places where people have lower incomes and higher rates of housing cost burden, those are places where they would be at higher risk of displacement than communities where they have the ability to be able to absorb rent increases or pay a really high mortgage and be housing cost burden. So
I guess the issue is in public hearings, will people understand that term, or is the term itself not self-explanatory? But no, I understand what you're saying, and I understand it's complex. But as a term, is that something the public will understand, or does it need a little bit of explaining when the term is used? But anyway, go ahead.
Andy, I just put in the chat an assisted AI summary of what it means with the key components to what is included in that, if it's helpful to you and for other commissioners.
I think Andy's raising a good point, though, just in terms of if you're not steeped in that, it like, so the city policy in so many ways is rooted in their displacement risk analysis. And so it's a very wonky, commonly understood term among the technical staff at the city. But it might, Andy's pointing out a point, I think, that maybe that it might not resonate with the general public. And so, yeah. I appreciate you pointing that out.
And I'll just jump in. This is Vanessa. Andy, thank you for pointing that out. I think that'll be a good question as we're meeting with individual city council members to ask what their understanding is of low displacement risk, high displacement risk, and if they have a sense of their constituents and their level of understanding. So.
Yeah. And I think if I can comment on I think I was the next in the chat.
You are.
Yeah, please.
You know, this accelerating displacement of longtime residents is, I just wanted to point out something that's of interest to me. The Growth Management Hearings Board issued a decision, an appeal of the city of Port Townsend's comprehensive plan and providing some of our first understanding in the state of how the courts are viewing the new provisions in the Growth Management Act, that you have to identify areas at high risk of displacement, work with those communities in developing your comprehensive plan strategies to increase housing density. You have to identify past racially exclusive and discriminatory housing and land use practices, and then identify policies to begin to repair those harms. And it appears maybe that some community groups in Port Townsend who filed the appeal used kind of the up zones as a and those new policies in the state to say, hey, we weren't engaged in these, properly engaged in this process to do these up zones. And we are residents who are at risk of displacement because we are in single family homes that might be torn down and replaced with multifamily buildings. And so it's a resonant court case, might be front of mind for some folks who are thinking about Seattle strategies. And the case got sent back to invalidated or something. I don't know. They got invalidated on the basis of them not doing proper public participation, and consistent with the city's own policy. So just what I was thinking of when I was seeing that bullet point was that there has been a tremendous amount of engagement with a whole different wide range of folks in the city, including in communities where they are at high risk of displacement, and low access to opportunity areas. And then also in communities where they have a low risk of displacement and a high access to opportunity. And I think we're hearing some of those residents of those communities organizing around the issue of displacement. And I don't think that's the kind of displacement that the Growth Management Act intended for planners to really target and think about. And the whole point of this, of our comprehensive plan, is to increase access to housing choice throughout the city. And in order to do that, we have to create more affordable options in more places throughout the city. So bringing forward information around the depth of engagement throughout the process, and bringing forward the full range of the types of residents who are engaged, because council will hear from people saying, I didn't know this was happening. This is happening too fast. The city hasn't properly studied this, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's mine.
Thank you.
Is that the kind of conversation you want to have today about your bullet points? I wasn't.
I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Michaela. Looks like TJ is next in the queue on a not displacement related topic. Were there others, TJ, if it's okay, were there others that maybe had something to add on this thread before maybe transitioning off? If not, I think we'll jump over to you, TJ.
Okay.
All right. Let's go to you. Yeah.
Okay. So it sounds like nobody else has questions or input on displacement. I want to make sure I'm not cutting off that discussion.
Okay, we're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Michaela, I had a question similar to the last question that you asked of Vanessa about what kind of conversation you're looking for, because I'm sure that we can have a really in-depth discussion about the bullet points themselves. Before we get there, just what's on my mind is about characterizing the larger larger emphasis of the response, because what I read in the materials that we reviewed a moment ago is that the letter the commission sent in April recommended that legislators move forward with centers and corridors as it was transmitted without changes, which I would assume implies the concerns that have been raised, the ones on this slide, we believe have been adequately addressed in the legislation that was transmitted. And I think that you can look at these concerns and assume that some of them may have been brought up in, let's say, bad faith, emphasizing a concern as sort of a proxy for a larger pushback against growth. And we can interpret the concern in good faith that neighbors, residents are concerned, legitimately concerned about each of these items and are looking to reconcile what's in the legislation as transmitted with what they fear might happen if we don't address the burden on parks. So I'm thinking when we brainstorm responses and when you all talk to legislators and relay our responses, can we or should we assume that all of these concerns are elevated in good faith and that the way that we want to respond is to reconcile growth and the existing legislation with these concerns?
I would say that to provide a little more context, I don't think we can assume that all of these have been addressed in the legislation, because when we looked at the legislation, we didn't look at it through the lens of these bullet points that the concerns that have been brought up since the transmittal of the legislation. The timing of the appeals, which put a pause on consideration of the centers and corridors legislation, has given people more time to look at the legislation and to coalesce, to meet with others, to say, hey, this is going too fast. We're not even sure that the centers and corridors legislation should be approved. And I think there is some concern that given the lag in time that that city council could be facing a similar situation to what they faced last fall when the One Seattle plan was transmitted by the mayor, and individuals who, constituents of city council members, came out and had some concerns and said they hadn't heard about this legislation, even though there had been exhaustive public engagement over a 4-year period. And that resulted in city council proposing over 100 amendments to the plan. And when you have, it's sort of like when you've got a number of people editing on the fly a document, the integrity of the document risks being compromised. When you have like 20 different people editing a document, it's no longer a single voice. You might be losing the bigger picture. Right. And so I think there is some concern that when centers and corridors legislation is considered by council early next year, there are city council members are going to be in a position where they have to answer their constituents. Yeah. And like I said, the list that is up on the screen isn't a comprehensive list of concerns that have been brought up, but it's a list. There's a common thread among some different groups who have organized. So I'm taking a long time to answer your question. How would I characterize our response? My thought was that we are, as an internal conversation, have a conversation around how would we respond to these concerns, not necessarily to package that or put that in a document,
Yeah.
but to have that work under our belt, so to speak, so that after we do manage to connect with city council members, hopefully in the next couple of months, we hear from them what would be helpful for them to have to answer their constituents. So I think different council members are going to have different concerns based on their constituents.
Yeah.
So right now, I don't have a proposal for what our response is going to look like, or not even a response, what our resource that we offer to city council members is going to look like. I want to hear from them what would be helpful for them before we fashion something, whether it's going to be a fact sheet on each of these items or a 4-pager higher level. Remember the vision of the One Seattle plan and what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
So we're right now sort of in a brainstorming phase in anticipation of hearing from city council what would be helpful for them.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
That does make sense. That's really helpful, Vanessa. So when we are speaking to council members and trying to provide them with what they need, I think that we can perhaps look for soft spots, weaker points, like amongst these concerns where it's more of a stretch to reconcile the centers and corridors legislation as it exists now with the concerns that are elevated, and provide council members with some feel for what trade-offs may be and how they would go about approaching those conversations. Like, why is the centers and corridors legislation, why is the general growth strategy worth pursuing without amendments, again, in order to actually have something adopted and be able to make some progress while acknowledging some potential trade-offs in the future.
I think that's a great point, because I don't know for a fact, because I haven't spoken to council members individually yet. I would imagine, though, as a council member, especially a district-based council member, is weighing those trade-offs. Like they were elected by either the whole city in the case of the citywide council members, or by a specific district, and they need to be accountable to their constituents. They also need to be accountable to the full city, even though they are district representatives, in terms of implementing the One Seattle plan, not only from a state requirement standpoint, Growth Management Act and whatnot, but also from the Middle Housing Bill, which is also a state mandate. So I think my thought is that in this first round of meetings with them, we're the planning commission. This is what we do. We've been following the development and the iterative development of the One Seattle plan and associated implementation legislation very closely for the last 5 years. We want to be a resource to you. You're going to be considering this legislation early 2027. What would be helpful for you? And then we'll have a second round of meetings with them in January or February of 2027, once they start to consider this legislation, and be able to respond to them. When we met with you in the fall, you noted these are some hot topics in your district, and or you noted that you're having a hard time reconciling the plan with your constituents' concerns. And so here is our response to you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We have Amir.
Thank you. I'm reading through these concerns. I think a lot of them are like technical nature, so loss of trees, urban canopy, neighborhood green space, as well as the opportunities for green spaces and overburdened parks and the resilience and the environmental protection items. I think there might be room, and I want to get a pulse from the room, virtually and physically, to include some sort of like carbon analysis. What I see here is that a full carbon accounting of the decision, like density in the city, which is the core function that this proposal is trying to cover, versus pushing the growth towards the edge of the region, like suburban sprawls and all that, if we slow down the plan. And I think that carbon analysis answers the concerns on trees and climate, on the infrastructure, and covers the emission side of displacement in one what I think could be a consistent framework. And I've done some back of the napkin calculation on the trees one that I'm happy to kind of briefly talk through if y'all think that that's a good approach to have an umbrella answer to a bucket of concerns.
I think that would be helpful. I defer to you, Nick.
Yeah, is there anyone, I agree. Is there anyone that has a response or that wants to kind of weigh in on this specific kind of question and topic that Amir is raising?
This is Deanna. I wanted to comment on the loss of trees and urban canopy, and I may have a different approach than that. I do feel that although helpful and evidence-based, the carbon analysis approach, can help justify or identify this, but it won't probably speak to the concerns of constituents. And so I have some other ideas, but I'll wait for my turn in the queue to speak to them. That would be my only comment to, Amir's an incredible proposition, and of course help if we could have that. I just believe that from a communication standpoint, it might be a little bit challenging to connect with how people's concerns about tree loss and tree canopy can, how an argument that is technical gets answered with more of the, kind of more emotional reaction to losing trees and, the true realities of losing important trees that are within private land. But I'll wait for my turn.
Thanks, Deanna. Yeah, I was thinking about that too. The technical solution to the technical challenge is sometimes not what people are looking for with their comments, but it looks like Zio maybe also has something to share on that Amir comment thread.
Yeah, I appreciate the data approach. I think the carbon accounting of the tree question related to urban density and the role of a city in a region of natural wonders that's rapidly sprawling outwards is like a very real one. But and I don't want to beat a dead horse on this, but I really think that the argument that's being made is an emotional appeal. And I said it before in our meetings that like peers that I have in other places in this country look to Seattle as being at kind of the forefront of tree protection and canopy growth in the nation. And the amount of tree canopy that we do have is extremely healthy compared to many other places. And I think this is an emotional appeal, not a particularly data-based one.
And I know we can think to, I don't know, Amir, the intended audience there, if it is the community, it sounds like some of us are in agreement that might not resonate as well with them, but there might be some council members that are interested in that particular information that could be useful too.
Totally.
Dylan,
Yeah.
Dylan, it looks like you have something on this thread as well.
Yeah, so there's a lot of topics here. The climate resilience, item 4, weaker climate resilience, economic or environmental protections. Yeah, I think that Amir's point about like the carbon analysis, while it may not respond appropriately to the tree folks, it would be a data point that we can lean on in addition to an array of others, and in addition to focusing more on like a story like you guys are saying. But we just hear again and again that folks are like, well, I don't think that we should be having this development here because we're losing trees and that's bad for nature. And to be able to just back pocket, bring out and say, no, actually, data, okay, move on. Like, I think it's not a bad thing to have because there's repeat concerns about the environmental appropriateness of the comprehensive plan, and this would immediately be able to give us a data point that we could point to and then move on and address these other guys. But I don't think it's a bad thing to have.
I'll just jump in. I agree. I think, at this stage, we are brainstorming and looking for comments to have at the ready so that after we hear the concerns of, or how we can help city council members, then we can pull them out. And I think data points are excellent, and hearing definitely from commissioners on the call who have noted that the response to trees can be very emotional, and not disregarding that, but being able to counter with data, with facts of both that Amir has offered to back of the envelope produce, as well as Zio's reference that Seattle is actually regarded around the country as a model for how to manage tree canopy and greenery. So I don't think we want to I don't think we want to dive deep into this. It's really more, actually, that's not factual. Here's the data point. Let's move on. And not necessarily try to do tit for tat, but to have to assemble for our internal resources answers to these concerns that are both factual, data-based, and consistent with the intent of the comp plan, Growth Management Act, etc.
I have a question. Are we exhausting the tree conversation now? Because otherwise I would like to chime in, or should I still wait for my opportunity in the queue?
I think we can come back to trees, because I know that
Okay.
Amir's point
I'll
was
hold.
broader than that. And yeah, I appreciate you putting the idea and offer out there, Amir. Sounds like it's going to be useful, just as that back pocket sort of analysis. So let's go to Patrick. Or did I skip Dylan? Dylan, did you have something other than the connection to Amir's? I don't
I
want
think
to.
Patrick's next in the queue, or yeah,
Patrick is next. Okay, thanks. All right, let's go to Patrick.
Oh, TJ's question about this just had me thinking that in all of these are fundamentally like legitimate issues in many ways, but it's, I think, an overarching thought I've had is like, should every piece of legislation solve every problem? Like centers and corridors is trying to address housing and other things, but all these issues will take dedicated council time and should be decoupled. And the comp plan has many sections that cover parks and infrastructure and other aspects. And the council's work will continue and will address these in other ways. And then I think that's where, like, to me, like a fundamental disingenuousness of the approach comes, is that centers and corridors legislation is not going to fix every problem and should not also be responsible for addressing every issue. That's it.
All right. Let's see. How about Rebecca?
Yeah, good transition, Patrick. You kind of beat me to it, but yeah, I'm like struggling with these concerns because they are, one, I think a lot of them are in bad faith, and also the same thing, like the comp plan is not supposed to solve all these problems all at once, and also working on the comp plan does not preclude the city from working on creating more park space or increasing our infrastructure capacity. Like these things can happen all at once, and it should happen all at once. And so I feel like they are distractions, really. There's just supposed to be speed bumps and delays, I think, for this process. And so what I'm thinking about and a little bit struggling with is what our role as the commission is, as a separate kind of purpose from council and city staff, where I'm kind of mourning the loss of the letter, because what I would like to say is, you know, let's kind of call this what it is. Some of these arguments are you don't want more people here, but we're getting more people here. So we need a place to put them, right? Like increased pressure on already overburdened parks. Like, what does that mean besides we don't want any more people coming to these parks? So I feel like responding to some of these with data is a good approach for some of them, but it's also meeting these arguments where they're at, which in my view is illegitimate. And I also feel like there are city staff whose job it is to pull that data. So what is missing in the conversation that we can fill in? I'm not saying it should be pointing those things out. I'm saying it could be. But I think it's important to kind of break these down, kind of look past the actual words here and like, what are these complaints actually saying? They're saying they don't want more people here or in these particular places, or that the people that are already there are somehow elevated over people who are going to be moving there, or who have already been displaced from there by virtue of already having been there. In some cases, I'm thinking of the like low displacement risk areas and the last minute comments. So I put that out for consideration of what is it that what role can we play in this conversation that would augment and supplement the work that will be done by the council members and staff, while also knowing that we can be supportive of them. And I think we should be. I'm thinking, especially if Councilmember Lynn is probably going to need a lot of support after passing the SEPA reform and is going to be quite vulnerable. But that is a really good piece of legislation that will really benefit the city for a long time. So I think we should prepare to support him and prepare to support all of the council members. But what else can we be thinking about in our communications that would supplement that?
And just a quick response to that, Rebecca. I love that mourning the letter. I've never heard a commissioner mourn the loss of a letter.
I know.
That is still an option.
Mhm.
So I think we really are in the gathering phase of getting our proverbial ducks in a row in terms
Yeah.
of how we want to respond to
Maybe
this.
both and.
Exactly. And so maybe come January, there will be a letter in addition to something else. And I think hearing from some of the council members, hopefully who will feel comfortable being candid with us. In the past, there have been council members who are no longer on council who have really appreciated the commission really coming out there and being able to say, wow, I mean, our planning commission says we should be going this far. We're not suggesting we go that far, but it helps move the ball along. So, the prospect of a letter is not completely close. It's not close. Thanks, Nick. I just wanted to address that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no problem. And yeah, I think Rebecca, the kind of the looking at the list of concerns, it kind of gets to, in my view, TJ's comment too about trade-offs and just understanding the consequences of growth that require planning and investment. And this isn't we are aware these concerns are out there, but I think reducing housing capacity or watering down the legislation doesn't necessarily solve these concerns. And I think it also, we know, worsens some of the underlying equity and affordability and kind of climate problems that we also have highlighted as really important to keep tracking towards solving. So it's trying to find that in our response. Like,
there's a lot of
this
different ways to say the same thing.
Yeah,
Right.
for sure.
That's, I think, what I'm thinking about a lot.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing those thoughts there. Dylan Glasecki.
Yeah. So I'm trying to, we have there's 8 items here, not to say this is everything, but this is kind of what we're focusing on right now. And just looking at these 8 items, trying to figure out where are the priorities. Sorry, not planes. Which ones are the priority ones? Which ones feel like it's either a stronger argument or there's been less, and I'm going to talk from my own experience or just my own knowledge, there seems to be less argument, against it. So just in look at these, I'm just going to run down the list just quickly. Trees is every time, it seems like every time there's an argument against the comp plan, trees get mentioned. So I think we need to put a lot of energy into that and coming up with a concise and argument that's story-based and emotional response. Even though I question the validity, I do think it's a place we need to put a lot of energy to figure out how to appropriately respond, just because it's so often mentioned. Keep going down the list. If we look at the overburdened parks, I just, kind of what Rebecca was saying, this is, in my opinion, weak argument. And it's kind of NIMBY based, and I don't know that we need to put a whole lot of energy into it. I think, we need to address all of these, but in terms of prioritizing, I think that's a lesser important one for us to put energy into. The reduced public open space, I also think that's a little bit of a, in terms of the other ones, a place we should put maybe less energy. I think that the weaker climate resilience one is one that does come up relatively frequently. I like the idea of having a data point we can just draw out. Um, and I think this is a weak argument as well. I think there's a lot of evidence out there that this is incorrect, and so I think we can package that with the existing evidence. If we go down to inequitable investments in stormwater, energy infrastructure, sewer, I think this is a really strong argument. Let's not say strong, but this is an argument that I'm concerned about. I've heard this multiple places. I've heard of it in technical circles. I've heard of it in folks that are in the know, that are in the industry, also bring this up. And I personally, and maybe folks know some counter arguments to this, but I haven't come across good counter arguments to this one. So I think this is a place to put our energy and to really come up with a response that is appropriate and convincing. There's three more here. So excluding residents from decisions that will shape Seattle. I think this one is a weak argument. There's been a lot of public outreach. We just need to display it and make it known. And then the last two, deny neighborhoods most impacted by historic inequities. This is an important one, in my opinion. I think we do need to put appropriate research into this, put some effort into this, and have an appropriate argument against, or just to be able to talk about this in an intelligent way. And I don't know there's a whole lot of information and research that we can draw on yet. So I think this is worth an effort. The last one, accelerating displacement, also, in my opinion, a very important one for us to spend time addressing and digging into and getting appropriate data for it. And I don't feel like I have enough information to be able to counter or talk to this one. So I'd like to do more research on this one as well. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Dylan. Thanks for running through that kind of point by point. And it sounds like Patrick maybe has some ideas on how to respond to some of that inadequate investment in some of the infrastructure. So maybe we'll go to Deanna next, but Patrick, if you could kind of hold that idea, we can kind of introduce that for discussion after Deanna. I've got Haley, then Michaela next. So Deanna.
Okay, thank you. I do think that, we should just agree that it's okay to allow development that doesn't do tree protection. I do still believe that there should be a way to frame the legislation and the language to codify density with trees as an outcome. I think that would help reduce that and explain what that looks like. And in my mind, that should look like ensuring that what we're protecting is trees that are mature trees, which is they're called tier 2 trees, basically 24 caliper inch trees, big trees, right? As well as what are called exceptional trees, right? Like these mega trees that we see when we're walking around neighborhoods in Seattle that, boy, do you not want to see come down for a building. So I think there's an opportunity to do that and strengthen that, just in the way that, if development is going to be authorized to reduce parking minimums, minimum requirements, that also means that we, when they're adjacent to frequent transit, for example, right, we could just be creating some kind of, minimum tree requirements. Like there could be successful ways to think about ways in which at a neighborhood base, certain tree canopy is protected and quantified. But also what I think is there's an incredible opportunity still to do in Seattle is to strengthen and add street trees. So long as the development, then the outcome of it is is a public right of way that accommodates trees wherever there is development pressure, to ensure that large mature trees are planted, not just the little saplings, right? Something that will truly kind of more quickly provide that look and feel of a shaded street, not just like shade that's going to be probably enjoyed, 2 generations from now when that tree grows. I think an approach that invests and requires a little bit more mature trees to be planted along areas of high pressure of development and rezoning would be, an important and valuable proposition where not all of, I mean, there could be some cost sharing with regards to the cost of, bringing in mature trees to these streets, but I think it's absolutely possible to do. And there's many other creative ideas that could be explored. But I did want to point out to some resources I put in the chat, which has to do with how there's a tool, Tree Equity Score, that actually measures all over the country, any of the cities. You can go and see and compare, which communities and which cities are, shade deserts. Seattle definitely is not a shade desert by and large, but you can already see if you go into it, the areas where we do have shade deserts. So another interesting equity approach for this is to make sure that, in areas where a mature tree needs to come down, kind of like with, housing, kind of quotas to say, well, if you're removing trees here and you can't accommodate them in place in the neighborhood, that there's a requirement to plant trees in these shade desert areas of our city. So I'll stop there. I have more ideas around that, but I do think it is something we can validate. We can just reinsure and make sure that city council puts their finger on the important things and then the important trees and topics, and create interesting approaches to ensuring street trees are implemented with the right maturity, perhaps to provide that reassurance that when development comes, large trees also come, and also figuring out a way or a mechanism in which we can do, add additional trees to areas that currently lack it in the city.
Thanks, Deanna. Seems like we could have a pretty lengthy discussion on trees alone, since it's such a hot topic, and just a lot of ideas around how to respond to this, because we all have different experiences, right? So appreciate you kind of raising that. Let's go Haley and then Patrick.
So at the risk of sounding like a lemming, because I went through all the websites and the pre-work and was and I've kind of only interacted with the websites of the environmental coalition folks who are against centers and quarters and the comp plan legislation, and I've only really interacted with these arguments when you see the folks come for public comment. And it's just a very, I mean, I don't know, I don't need to describe it, but it's a different vibe than the websites. And because Rebecca, that's usually that, when Rebecca, you were talking about these are not in good faith, it's that's sort of the emotional response I have when I'm watching the public comment about it. But looking at the websites, I was oh, a lot of this actually kind of makes sense. And sort of is weirdly, I was well, this kind of agrees with, I feel what the commission would say. I think I was most struck by what the same street, different futures, where they gave the picture of Aurora Ave and then the proposed. And I was that looks like something that could come out of the planning commission. It's a picture of a huge developments with a bunch of trees. I'm that looks good, so where, and I, maybe this is a step backwards, because I know we said we weren't going to do we were going to pause on the collecting photos and plans and looking at other cities. But I'm that was really powerful for me to look at. If I was someone who didn't know anything about this debate, I would look at that picture of Aurora Ave, the redesigned Aurora Ave, and maybe you all designers and planners are there's a million ways why this is bad or would never work or something like that. But I was that looks good to me. And so I think there's a way to look at this where we respond to these concerns, all the reasons it's wrong, and is there any space to be yeah, we the comp plan is also concerned with we want climate resilience, we want environmental protections. Some of these there's points of agreement, because it's interesting, Michaela, that you brought up the Complete Communities Coalition, because that coalition is always interesting to me, because there's members on it that I think disagree on a lot of really important points, but they managed to come together and draft really important work. And you know, we're not a coalition, but like if we're responding directly to these concerns, like, are there ways that it's like, you know, we we agree with a lot of these points in XYZ ways? And two ways I was thinking that we maybe could do that, and this is kind of like what the work would be, is um you know, like interpreting what some of those zoning levels are as someone who's not someone who like builds buildings, that like LR1, MR1, MR3 like get really lost. And I think, or to me, like I'm like, what do these all mean again? And I think it gets really easy to think like, yeah, the comp plan is just going to be, I'm looking at the Green Neighborhoods Coalition. They have this like picture of like a bunch of little buildings and there's a ton of trees. And then they have like these huge block full buildings and there's like one tree. And it's like, that's not my understanding of what all the different zoning levels mean. You know, and one of the websites had a picture of, uh, like two townhouses built and there's no trees anymore. And I'm like, well, that's like one way, but like what are some other ways like these like new zoning changes, like what other types of buildings could that um produce? And so maybe I'm making us take two steps backward because I'm like back to those pictures because they just were really powerful to me. And then just the other thing I wanted to note, which I'm not sure how we would like what product this would turn into, but I actually know um, one of the folks that's on one of the websites who wrote a memo about, she's a Black woman, she lives in the Central District, wrote a memo about like, I'm a NIMBY and this is why. I I don't know her super personally, but I'm like know who she is and have met her before, and it just was interesting. Like I think it's really easy to say like we know that this legislation is going to reduce displacement, and like the opposite, if we don't pass it, it's going to like make more displacement. But like we've also seen with like the implementation of this, right, that like a lot of neighborhood centers and areas of low displacement risk were removed. And like how can we be, I don't want to say, because I don't think anything we've ever produced is disrespectful, but like how can we honor the knowledge that folks who've lived here for a long time like maybe understand a little bit more about what this legislation might actually do? Like, um, yeah, I don't know. Like, what are some, like, could we highlight to council like in the implementation of this policy, like these are some risks of displacement that could come up, which I do think we did in the other letter, right? We said like, hey, we got rid of some of those neighborhood centers and that wasn't great. Like, are there other areas we could push as well? Okay, I'll stop talking now. Thanks.
Yeah, really appreciate you sharing that, Haley. Also, I hadn't done a deep dive into some of those pages, so I'm gonna do that. And that's really, yeah, thanks for sharing. Patrick.
Oh, Dylan just had me thinking about one of the points we've made at the AAA a little bit when we're meeting with council members is that development provides things. I'm working on two projects. One just finished and one is moving forward next to each other, and they're collectively paying for, I think, 1,000-foot addition to a water main that's a system-wide upgrade. They're paying for a system-wide upgrade for Seattle City Light that will serve the whole neighborhood. They're rebuilding the sidewalks. They're providing new public plaza in what was unused right away. They're adding many, many trees to a site that had 0 trees. The city has stood up its own nursery for growing trees and is planting more trees in the right of way. But most of the time I see trees added in the city, it's associated with new development. I think people don't realize that like a lot of what gets improved in the city comes with development. I don't see the city building sidewalks very often, but I see new projects building sidewalks, building better sidewalks. And I think it's just a point that could be made. Ultimately, though, I think the stormwater, sewer, and energy infrastructure is like a throwaway comment by NIMBYs. I don't think they get deep into it. And Dylan was mentioning that perhaps there is a deeper concern among people who know more, but I don't feel like they usually provide that much evidence. And when I hear them testify, it's trees, 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 and orcas. But I just think it's a point that could be made.
All right. Thanks, Patrick. How about Michaela?
Okay, we have a requirement to read chats into the record. So very early on in the conversation, I dropped a link into the Growth Management Hearings Board, Fort Townsend. And then I dropped in a link for an academic response to some of the displacement concerns. And it's an article by Karen Chappell and So Song called Does New Housing Supply Affect Displacement? And then my final chat message was Complete Communities Coalition has continues to produce resources to inform council decision-making on elements of the comprehensive plan and subsequent implementation. And so on their resources page, there's two new documents. One is implementing Seattle's comprehensive plan, 2026 centers and corridors amendment proposals. And then the second one is titled Right Tree, Right Place, a Greener, Housing Abundant Seattle. Wanted to read out a couple of things because I know not everybody has the time to read these documents after the meeting. In the tree document alone, the Complete Communities Coalition shared that since under the 2023 tree protection ordinance, builders have planted or protected more than 14,100 trees while removing just 4,369, a rate of nearly 325% more than removals. Most of the significant tree loss in Seattle is happening outside of construction activity, not because of home building, and that in our parks, the natural areas, we have lost 5.1% of canopy between 2016 and 2021 for a net loss of 111 acres. 99% of Seattle residents live within a 10-minute walk of a park. And then they go on to provide some policy recommendations, which is invest in street trees, incentivize preservation. They're recommending park-oriented development. They bring some suggestions for bringing predictability to the tree code, encouraging to grow proven programs, which is Seattle's Trees for Neighborhoods program, recommending prioritizing the right species that can survive in our changing climate, pointing out the obvious, which is if we're really worried about tree canopy loss while we grow, plant more in parks, that's a real opportunity. And then really consistent with our past commission work is with the repurposing the right of way is depave for green space. So being really solutions oriented there, but also really data driven in the first two pages. While I have the mic, I'll just say I've been on the commission for a long time now, and we have worked through all of these bullet points. I was on the commission when early engagement on the comprehensive plan started, and the city of Seattle actually did start with providing grants to communities to engage residents in neighborhoods most disproportionately impacted by historic inequities. And so those communities had a voice early in the process. Their voice is being drowned out. It's kind of dispiriting to engage in a process, say, that starts in 2022 or 2021, and then have your community recommendations not really carried through to the final product or changed by council due to more active and engaged citizens at the end of the process. And so there really has been that engagement all along. And I think the city, in response to some criticism for the taller, denser, faster legislation, just briefed us recently on special convening that they had with folks who are experiencing, who represent communities at high risk of displacement to inform that legislation. So I do not think those neighborhoods have been denied a voice, and in fact, have had a seat at the table along the way. It's just whether or not council will be able to understand how the proposal that is in front of them carries forward the recommendations from those communities. Because I'd say a lot of what they changed at the last minute with the comprehensive plan was, for example, removing neighborhood centers and areas that were at low risk of displacement and high access to opportunity, for example, which would have been inconsistent with a lot of the feedback they were getting from communities that were like, we want a chance to live in more parts of the city. And if we're going to densify and increase and grow, we should grow in places where we don't currently have an opportunity to live.
Thanks, Michaela, and thanks for the reminder on the chat. That is my bad as well. I just created an offense myself. Haley had noted one of the kind of the visions for Aurora, and so I had put in the chat kind of that picture because I also feel like that's quite compelling. And also, I would agree, sort of the vision that we were thinking, or that some on the commission felt was a really great vision to pursue, that being trees, both kind of within that center median, but then also a lot of the street trees that are developed. They're also showing kind of very mature trees that don't exist. So that would be, years later, obviously after redevelopment occurs. But the point that I was making too is I think what Patrick was also suggesting is that if we want to see this type of improvement, that is some of the responsibility of developers to provide when redevelopment occurs. And so enabling that density is going to create those opportunities to see the type of public realm improvements that I think are of concern to some of the comments that are being made by some of these groups. So that was my comment. Let's see. Are there others that want to maybe go back and read out any of their comments or make their points, voice their points rather? I know, Amir, you had some kind of continued threads on the tree topic. Can I call on you to maybe recap some of the ideas or suggestions that you were making in the chat?
Yeah, definitely. So based on my past experience from when I was in California, I worked on a lot of stormwater projects, mostly sidewalk and urban plazas improvements within the city of San Francisco. We commissioned a study that found that the majority of the trees that are planted within cityscape projects die because of inadequate oxygen access. So like paved around the sidewalks are all, the paved areas around the sidewalks are all impervious, don't allow for the trees to grow. In every tree, based on its type and the neighborhood that it's in, requires a much larger space for the root to fully mature and grow into. So pairing to everyone else's points here, those trees with development projects that can expand beyond the tree wall itself and provide that room for continued growth and thriving of the tree would provide a much better return on investment dollars on trees planted, as opposed to investing the extra dollars on mature trees that typically don't come with that expanded infrastructure improvements that is required for them to thrive. So that was one note that I wanted to highlight.
Thanks, Amir.
Thanks. Yeah.
Let's see. So, Dylan, you had a quick response. It looks like we've got about 5 minutes left. So, yeah, please go.
Oh man, I'm trying to remember it. Okay, yeah, I appreciated Patrick's point about lean on developers and developers providing the infrastructure when their projects go in. That is a good one. That goes down a whole other rabbit hole of costs of development that I will table for now since we're short on time. I just wanted to make a quick point. We're talking about a lot of these, other groups. A lot of people think in this way, and we don't agree with them. And the people that we bring in when we have discussions oftentimes are OPCD. Oftentimes we're in alignment. And so I'm just throwing out there, do we want to consider the idea of inviting somebody from a group that has a conflict with the comp plan in a particular subject? Not somebody that's just going to come rail on it, but that perhaps could talk to displacement concerns or underrepresented neighborhood concerns, somebody that can talk to a very specific subject to come and chat with us at one of our meetings. And I just wanted to throw that out there for folks to think about if that might make sense for us to get a bit of a broader perspective.
Dylan, if I can respond to that, this is Vanessa. This is something we've grappled with over my tenure here, staffing the Planning Commission. Once we invite one group that is not city staff, so typically we only have city staff, sometimes we have Sound Transit staff, but once we invite one group, it calls into question, what about all the other groups who haven't been provided an invitation? And can we be confident that we're actually reaching out to everybody who might want to come to us? And then do we have the capacity? I think it's a great idea. And what I would propose, if there is appetite on commissioners, is for commissioners to pair up and meet outside of a planning commission meeting with individuals who you may know. Haley, you mentioned you know somebody who posted, and then bring that conversation back to the commission. And that way, we are not restricting access to the planning commission to only a handful of people. And also, one of our former commissioners and former co-chair Matt was very active in reaching out to tree folks and the Parks Foundation and trying to create that kind of first gain an understanding of what their points were in trying to bridge the tree versus housing. I think he's still doing that, so we can tap on him. But my suggestion, my advice would be to have commissioners meet, and staff can help facilitate that outside of the context of a planning commission meeting, and then bring the results of that conversation back to the commission. If that makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks, Vanessa. All right. Staff, was this, I mean, do you feel like you got some notes? I always wonder how you manage all these conversations, but
We've got some great notes.
okay.
And so Olivia, John and I will put our heads together and kind of start to flesh out, putting today's conversation in, organizing it both by these, the points that are on here, as well as the broader bigger picture thinking about how to approach and what to prioritize. And that'll be present in the meetings, but also we'll probably start a separate document that becomes an internal reference document for us to reference back after we've had the opportunity to speak with council members and figure out what it is we are going to deliver. Whether it is, and it can be both and, it can be a letter and a 4-pager. It can be individual 1-pagers on specific issues. So I think as we speak to council members, we'll get a better sense of what would be most useful to them. So we're still in the information collection phase. And if you, after this meeting, have thoughts that didn't make it into the chat or didn't get airtime, please feel free to email me, and then I'll incorporate that.
Great. Thanks, Vanessa. And yeah, thank you all for the grace today. I made it through my first time chairing a full commission meeting, and we'll keep the chats kind of in the verbal discourse. So yeah, just really appreciate everyone helping make it a good conversation today. So with that, I guess we can adjourn. Thanks.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, thank you.